In another reality, Steph Curry never became the face of Golden State. There were no championships, no MVP trophies, no dynasty. Instead, he was shipped off to a franchise that saw him as nothing more than a trade piece, a gamble on weak ankles and untapped potential. The world never got to see what he could become until he decided to rewrite history himself. The year was 2012, and the Golden State Warriors were standing at the edge of uncertainty. The franchise had spent years struggling to find an identity, bouncing between mediocrity and fleeting moments of promise, always just one step away from irrelevance. And now, they faced a decision that could change everything. Steph Curry, the undersized guard with an unbelievable shooting touch, had given them glimpses of something special. His ability to stretch the floor, his confidence from deep, his natural feel for the game. There was something there, something different. But there was also a problem. His ankles. They had betrayed him time and time again. Sprains, tweaks, games missed, whispers of fragility, doubts about whether his body could handle an 82-game season, let alone a full playoff run. The front office had begun to wonder, was he really worth building around? Would his career ever take off? Or would they be left with another what-could-have-been story? The phone rang. The Milwaukee Bucks were calling. They had an offer. It wasn't an unreasonable one. Andrew Bogut, a defensive anchor, a legitimate big man who could solidify Golden State's frontcourt, in exchange for either Curry or Klay Thompson. The Warriors had two young guards, both promising, both capable shooters, but one of them had an injury history that made him a risk. One of them had to go. The trade discussions were real. The paperwork was nearly finalized. Some in the room wanted to pull the trigger. The logic was there. Klay was healthy, reliable, easier to build around. Bogut could give them the inside presence they desperately needed. Steph's future was uncertain. Maybe Milwaukee would be a better fit. Maybe it was time to move on. Then came the hesitation. One more debate. One more conversation. One last look at what Curry could be if he stayed healthy. And at the last moment, the Warriors' front office made their decision. They kept Curry. Instead, they traded Monta Ellis, sending him to the Bucks instead. The deal went down in history as the move that changed the course of the NBA, the pivotal moment that allowed Golden State to build around Steph, leading to a dynasty, championships, and a revolution in how basketball was played. But history is fragile. It is made up of split-second choices, of moments that could have gone the other way. Because in another version of reality, the hesitation never came. The deal went through, and everything Steph Curry was supposed to become never happened. Steph's eyes opened, but before his mind could register the familiar rhythm of his morning routine, something fell off. It wasn't the usual comfort of his Golden State locker room, the warm, buzzing energy of teammates laughing, joking, going through pre-game rituals. Instead, the air felt heavier, colder, as if it belonged to a place he wasn't supposed to be. His fingers instinctively reached for his jersey, the one he had worn since the beginning, the one that had become a part of his identity. But the fabric that met his fingertips was different. Thicker, unfamiliar. The colors were wrong. His heartbeat quickened as his gaze dropped, and when his eyes landed on the logo sprawled across his chest, his breath caught in his throat. Milwaukee Bucks. A chill ran through him, his mind racing to make sense of what he was seeing. He turned, expecting to see familiar faces, Klay, Draymond, maybe Steve Kerr walking in with his usual composed stride. But none of them were there. None of them had ever been there. Steph took a slow step back, his mind scrambling for an explanation, but nothing made sense. He had been a warrior. His legacy had been built in Golden State. He had lifted trophies, shattered records, changed the way basketball was played. Hadn't he? The championship banners he had once dreamed of winning, the future that had felt so certain, all of it was gone. In this reality, he had never become a warrior. He turned toward the locker room television, the screen flashing a highlight reel from last night's games. His eyes locked onto the footage playing across the screen, and what he saw made his stomach drop. There, in a Golden State Warriors jersey, was Klay Thompson. The crowd roared as he drained a deep three, then another, the commentators' voices ringing out in excitement. Klay Thompson, the face of the Warriors, leading this team to yet another playoff run. Steph felt his entire world tilt sideways. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't some glitch in the system. This was real. And in this world, Klay had become the star. The dynasty that had once been his was no longer his. The Warriors had moved on. The NBA had moved on. And the name Steph Curry? Barely a footnote. A promising guard, sure. A capable shooter, maybe, but not a revolution. Not a legend. Not the face of the league. He had been erased. His legacy, the one he had built with every deep three, every record shattered, every championship ring gone. The realization hit like a tidal wave, a weight settling on his chest that felt almost suffocating. He had spent his entire career proving people wrong, fighting against the doubts, the criticisms, the voices that said he wasn't built for this. And now, in this reality, those voices had been right. He wasn't a two-time MVP. He wasn't a champion. He wasn't a generational talent who changed the way the game was played. He was just another player. And that was something he couldn't accept. Something inside him snapped. If fate had decided to erase him, then he would rewrite history himself. The first few weeks in Milwaukee were a blur of confusion, frustration, and a growing sense of detachment from the game he once loved. The team welcomed him with professional courtesy, but there was no real excitement, no feeling that he was the missing piece to something great. He was just another guard, another role player meant to fit into a system that was never designed for someone like him. The offense was slow, structured, focused on post-play and mid-range efficiency, a direct contrast to the free-flowing, three-point heavy attack that had defined his game. Here, deep threes weren't encouraged. Here, the idea of pulling up from 30 feet wasn't revolutionary. It was reckless. Every game felt like he was playing against the system rather than within it. He would run up the court, scanning for openings that never came, feeling the weight of forced passes, contested mid-range shots, plays that didn't belong to him. The confidence that had once defined him, the fearlessness that had made him special, began to erode. The coaching staff didn't see him as a focal point. He wasn't the face of the franchise, the player they would build around. He was an asset, a shooter who could space the floor, a complementary piece, not the leader, not the difference maker. The first few months passed, and his numbers dipped. His three-point attempts per game were cut nearly in half, his minutes inconsistent, his rhythm completely off. It wasn't that he was bad, he was still Steph Curry, still one of the best shooters in the world, but without a system that played to his strengths, his impact was muted, forgettable. And then came the worst part, the silence. The media, once fascinated by his potential, simply stopped talking about him. He wasn't headlining articles. His highlights weren't making waves. Instead, every conversation about the NBA's future revolved around a different name, Klay Thompson. The Warriors were thriving. Without him, he tried to ignore it at first. He told himself he didn't care, that it was out of his control, that he just needed to focus on improving. But the reality was impossible to avoid. Every game, every highlight reel, every conversation about the Warriors felt like a knife twisting deeper into his gut. Klay Thompson had become the face of Golden State. It wasn't just that Klay was playing well, he was dominating. He had taken the same role Steph was supposed to have and turned it into a legacy. The Warriors, under his leadership, became a juggernaut. They built the offense around his shooting, surrounded him with the right pieces, gave him the freedom that had once belonged to Steph. And in return, he delivered championships. The moment that shattered Steph came in June. Game 6 of the NBA Finals. He had been watching from his apartment in Milwaukee, the volume turned low, the room dimly lit. The television flickered, showing the final minutes of Warriors versus Heat, a game that was about to cement a new dynasty. Klay was playing out of his mind, draining threes, orchestrating plays, stepping into the moment like he was born for it. And then, with 40 seconds left on the clock, he did something that made Steph's blood run cold. Klay pulled up from the logo. It was the kind of shot Steph would have taken, the kind of moment he had once dreamed of owning. The ball spun through the air, the crowd holding its breath, and when it splashed through the net, Oracle Arena erupted into madness. The Warriors were champions. Klay was Finals MVP. Steph sat frozen, watching as confetti rained down, as his former teammates celebrated, as the narrative of history was being rewritten in real time. The headlines were instant. Klay Thompson, the star Golden State always needed. Steph who? The Warriors were right to trade him. Golden State didn't need Curry. They needed Klay. The world had moved on. And for the first time in his life, Steph felt like he had been erased. The night of the finals, he didn't sleep. The words of the commentators kept replaying in his head. The sound of Klay's name being chanted by thousands. The sight of his old team raising a trophy that should have been his. The media had rewritten history, cementing Klay as the greatest shooter of his generation, the face of the three-point revolution. Steph wasn't even a part of the conversation anymore. And that was something he couldn't accept. Something inside him snapped. He had spent his entire life proving people wrong, from the college scouts who said he was too small, to the analysts who doubted he could lead a team, to the coaches who questioned if he could handle the physicality of the NBA. But this wasn't just about proving people wrong. This was about taking back what was his. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, he was in the gym. No trainers, no cameras, just him and the silence. He started with ball-handling drills, pushing himself harder than ever, driving himself past the limits he had once believed in. Every move was sharper, every hesitation gone. His shooting drills became relentless. Pull-up threes, step-backs, shots from deep beyond the arc. He wouldn't just match Klay's shooting. He would surpass it. The rage inside him wasn't just anger. It was fuel. He studied Klay's game, watched every movement, every foot placement, every angle, every release. He memorized his old team's plays, dissected every Warriors possession, learned every adjustment they had made without him. He transformed himself. He refused to let his story end like this. The league had decided that he was just another player. The media had chosen to erase him. Fine, let them believe it. Because the next time he stepped onto the court, they wouldn't be writing him off. They would be rewriting history. And when he got his chance to face the Warriors, to face Klay, to face the dynasty that had erased him, he would prove to the world what they had lost. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It wasn't the kind of redemption arc that unfolded neatly, the way it did in movies or underdog stories told for inspiration. It was ugly, exhausting, and relentless. Steph had spent his entire career fighting against doubt. First from scouts who said he was too small, then from analysts who claimed he was too injury-prone, then from critics who swore he would never be the face of a franchise. But this time, the doubt was different. This time, it came from every corner of the basketball world. The league had moved on. The Warriors had moved on. The fans had moved on. And that was what hurt the most. But if he had learned anything from his years of defying expectations, it was that narratives could be rewritten. He wouldn't go down as the forgotten star, the player who got away, the guy who could have been great but wasn't. No, he would build something new, something undeniable, something that forced the world to pay attention again. Steph walked into the Bucks front office and demanded change. The system they had built wasn't made for a player like him. And if they weren't willing to adapt, he wouldn't waste another year being mediocre. The message was simple. We play my way, or I walk. He wasn't here to be another role player. Wasn't here to fit into their slow, post-heavy offense. He was here to redefine their entire culture. He pushed for pace, for movement, for space. He drilled his teammates relentlessly, pulling them into extra shooting sessions, forcing them to adjust to a system that prioritized quick ball movement and perimeter scoring. He didn't care about resistance. If they weren't willing to play fast, they weren't going to play with him at all. At first, there was pushback. Some teammates questioned the sudden shift, the abrupt change in philosophy, the audacity of a player demanding that an entire organization revolve around him. But then, the results started showing. The Bucks started winning. His shooting reached unprecedented levels. He wasn't just draining threes. He was breaking records. He was pulling up from deeper than ever, forcing defenses to stretch beyond their limits, making impossible shots look routine. His range became a weapon that defenses had no way to counter. Slowly, the world started to take notice. The same analysts who had written him off, who had said that Golden State's system made him great, who had declared Klay as the superior player, were forced to reconsider. The headlines started shifting. Milwaukee was no longer just another playoff team. They were contenders. And leading them, standing at the center of it all, was a man who had been cast aside but refused to disappear. Then came the moment that changed everything. 2022, the NBA Finals. Milwaukee Bucks versus Golden State Warriors. The world held its breath. The build-up to the finals was unlike anything the league had seen in years. The storylines were too perfect, too poetic to ignore. This wasn't just another championship series. This was revenge, destiny, history rewriting itself in real time. Steph's Bucks had clawed their way to the top, a team built on defiance, on resilience, on proving the world wrong. And standing across from them were the Golden State Warriors, Clay's Warriors, the dynasty that had been built without him. The media called it the Legacy Series. The entire basketball world watched to see if Steph Curry had ever truly been great, or if Golden State had made him great. Was he a system player, a product of an organization that had perfectly catered to his strengths? Or was he a generational talent, someone whose greatness transcended teams, coaches, and circumstances? Clay versus Curry, the battle that never should have happened. For the first 6 games, it was a war. The Warriors played like the dynasty they had become, with Clay leading the charge, draining threes with the same effortless confidence that had once defined Steph. But the Bucks, gritty and relentless, refused to fold. The series stretched to 7 games, neither team willing to let go of their claim to history. And then came Game 7. The Chase Center was deafening. The crowd was standing, chanting, their voices blending into a wall of sound that pulsed through the arena. Tie game. 10 seconds left. Warriors ball. Steve Kerr called a timeout, drawing up the final play of the game. The entire world knew what was coming. This was Clay's moment. This was the coronation of the dynasty, the final dagger that would cement everything the Warriors had built without Steph. The ball was inbound. The play unfolded in slow motion. Clay came off a screen, curling to the top of the key, the ball finding his hands with perfect precision. It was the shot he had taken 1,000 times before, the shot that had made him a champion, the shot that had once belonged to someone else. Steph saw it before it happened. He had seen the shot too many times, had practiced this exact play alongside Clay for years, had studied his tendencies, knew every angle, every movement, every rhythm. And in the moment where history was supposed to repeat itself, he changed it. He closed the gap. He reached up, and he blocked it. The ball ricocheted off the backboard, the crowd gasping in disbelief, the Warriors scrambling, chaos erupting as the shot clock expired. The Bucks had the ball. One final possession. One last shot to decide everything. 8 seconds. 7. 6. Steph dribbled up the court, his heartbeat steady, his mind clear. There was no doubt, no hesitation, no second-guessing. The years of doubt, the pain of watching his career slip away, the narrative that had been written without him, none of it mattered anymore. He stepped past half-court, pulled up from 35 feet, released. The ball hung in the air, spinning, spiraling, a lifetime of moments condensed into a single shot. The buzzer sounded. The ball splashed through the net. Game over. The Bucks were NBA champions. The confetti fell. The cameras flashed. The crowd erupted in a mixture of shock and awe. Steph stood at the center of it all, arms raised, his teammates surrounding him. The weight of 10 years of doubt finally lifted off his shoulders. A reporter, breathless, caught him in the moment, microphone in hand. "Steph, does this prove that you never needed Golden State to be great?" He paused, letting the question hang in the air, letting the moment settle. Then, with the same quiet confidence that had always defined him, he smiled. "I was never great because of where I played. I was great because of who I am." And just like that, history was rewritten. The celebration raged on, confetti falling in waves, the arena alive with the echoes of a moment that would be talked about for generations. Steph stood at the center of it all, not just as the finals MVP, not just as a champion, but as a man who had reclaimed his own story. This wasn't just another title. This wasn't just another ring. This was the moment that proved, without a doubt, that he was never just a product of Golden State's system. For years, the narrative had been written for him. Steph Curry was a system player. Steph Curry needed the Warriors. Steph Curry wouldn't have been great anywhere else. But now, there was nothing left to argue. He had built something from the ground up, dragged Milwaukee from mediocrity, defied the expectations that had buried him, and forced the world to rewrite the story they thought they already knew. As the cameras surrounded him, as the cheers swelled, a familiar voice called his name. A reporter, microphone in hand, pushing through the chaos, eager for the moment the world had been waiting for. She finally reached him, and the noise around them faded into the background. Steph, after everything, the trade, the doubt, the years of being overlooked, what does this championship mean to you? For a second, he didn't answer. He let the moment breathe, let himself feel the weight of every year he had spent being told he wasn't good enough, every headline that had erased his name, every moment of doubt that had tried to break him. He thought about the nights in Milwaukee, the silence of a forgotten star, the feeling of watching someone else live the life that had once been his. He thought about Clay, about Golden State, about everything he had built there and everything that had been taken away. Then, finally, he smiled. "It means that failure isn't the end," he said, voice steady, firm. "It's just the part where you decide what happens next." The victory didn't just restore his reputation. It elevated it. The win wasn't just about proving he could succeed without Golden State. It was about proving that greatness isn't about where you are. It's about who you are. Over the next year, everything changed. The Curry brand, which had once been overshadowed, mocked, dismissed as just another failed sneaker line, became a movement. Kids didn't just buy his shoes because they looked cool. They bought them because they represented something real. Resilience, perseverance, the refusal to accept someone else's version of your future. Steph took control of his brand the way he had taken control of his career. He partnered with young designers, not corporations. He worked with athletes who had been overlooked, who had been doubted, who had been cast aside. He built something that wasn't just about performance. It was about proving people wrong. And just like that, the final chapter of his career became something no one had predicted. This wasn't about legacy anymore. This was about inspiration. Months later, long after the championship celebrations had faded, long after the interviews and headlines had moved on, Steph found himself alone in an empty arena. The court stretched before him, silent, waiting the same way it always had. He walked to the three-point line, the place that had made him a legend, the place where everything had started. He dribbled the ball slowly, feeling the weight of it in his hands, the familiar rhythm of a lifetime spent chasing something greater. He looked up at the hoop, his vision clear, his mind steady. And then, in the silence of an empty gym, he let it fly. The ball spun through the air, perfect, effortless, the same shot he had taken a million times before. And as it fell through the net with a soft, familiar swish, he smiled. Because now he knew. He had never needed Golden State. He had never needed a system. Greatness had never been about where he played. It had always been about who he was. And now the world knew it too. Greatness isn't defined by circumstances. It's defined by how you respond when everything is taken from you. Steph Curry's journey wasn't just about proving he could win without Golden State. It was about proving that success isn't about where you are, but who you are. The world will always try to write your story for you, telling you what you can or can't be, deciding your worth based on factors beyond your control. But the truth is, your legacy isn't built by others. It's built by the choices you make when no one believes in you. Failure isn't the end of the road. It's the moment you decide whether to accept your fate or rewrite it. Steph's story is a reminder that adversity is inevitable, but defeat is a choice. The path to success isn't always fair, and sometimes the opportunities you deserved will go to someone else. But if you refuse to quit, if you refuse to let the world forget your name, if you keep fighting when no one is watching, your moment will come. Greatness doesn't come from comfort. It comes from pushing forward even when history has counted you out. And when that moment finally arrives, when the shot is yours to take, the only thing that matters is whether you have the courage to take it.